It's time for America to go back to Afghanistan. That is what a New York Times opinion piece is imploring us to do. Well, that didn't take long, did it? Now, thankfully, the author of this piece, Kathy Gannon, isn't calling for another invasion. However, she does want the U.S. to resume work at the now empty U.S. Embassy in Kabul to give them even more humanitarian aid as well, and to put pressure on the Taliban and tribal leaders to care more about women, girls, and human rights as defined by the West. But I have to stop Kathy here. Despite all her naive goodwill, nation building failed. It failed when we had troops on the ground, costing us precious blood and treasure we'll never get back. And it will fail through soft power coercion as well. The author refuses to address the giant elephant in the room on this, which is that Kabul is controlled by the Taliban, but the rest of the nation pays almost no heed to Kabul as they are controlled by family clans and warlords. And the thing all these guys have in common is that they are militantly Muslim. She left that part out. Kathy is asking them to give up their warlike faith, which is the entire core of their being, in a way a Western secular liberal could never understand. Hence their imbecility with the migration crisis, thinking that all peoples want the same things when that's manifestly not the case in culture wars. And so Kathy wants them to give up their entire core being in order to have, what, Starbucks on every street corner and George Floyd murals painted in their capital like we literally had until the 2021 withdrawal. Yeah, no, money ain't gonna fix that, and especially because the honor cultures that make up the tapestry of Afghanistan, which is nowhere near being a unified nation, well, they're riding on a high of success right now. Why would they turn back at this point? They aren't called the graveyard of empires for no reason. They've been at perpetual war since 1979 and have defeated both the Soviets and now the Americans in that time span. After all that success, does Kathy really think they're going to change course now to see their daughters, quote unquote, defiled, at least in their eyes, but going to school with boys? As much as that sucks, and I'd love to see them converted from Islam to Christianity, it's not our problem. We're not equipped to fight it. We're not missionaries going out there. So our intervention only makes things worse. Far worse and not better. Trying to make them exchange violent Islam for soulless Western liberal secularism, it's not going to work. The author is even forced to admit toward the end of the article that, quote, financially America has continued to be generous to Afghanistan, providing significant humanitarian aid since the Taliban's return to power. In fact, America remains one of the nation's largest humanitarian donors, having spent about $2 billion on aid since leaving the country. At the same time, the United States and European nations are holding more than $9 billion in Afghan assets frozen since the Taliban's return. It would also be helpful if Western officials' public statements aided in finding a path forward rather than inflaming sentiments. Speaking to Congress in April about how U.S. funds were being used in Afghanistan, the U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko, said, "I would just say, I haven't seen a starving Taliban fighter on TV. They all seem to be fat, dumb, and happy. I see a lot of starving Afghan children on TV. So I'm wondering where all this funding is going." While Mr. Sopko's concerns about how U.S. money was being spent may have been legitimate, that kind of caricature is not in anyone's interest, end quote. So Sopko makes a great point about the futility of our continued spending in the region because it's going to the back pockets of terrorists, and all the author can retort with is scolding in the form of a schoolmarm. Now that's not a nice way to talk about murderous militants letting kids starve while they buy new weapons. Now, to her teensy tiny credit, Kathy does say that money alone won't fix this, but she also never really says exactly what will, except for the fact that Americans must return in some form to the country to somehow accomplish that vague end. Which means troops will have to go back to, because there is no way we would reopen an embassy without those officials and their families being protected. But now guess what? We're once again opening up ourselves to attack by the Taliban or by ISIS-K or by just any old Mohammed who doesn't want to see us return to his country. And then we will be confronted with the exact same question that plagued us in conflicts as far away as Vietnam and Somalia. That once American troops start dying, do we send in more or do we withdraw? And if the answer is the former, we're right back to where we started from and having learned absolutely nothing along the way. This is what young men are being asked to risk life and limb for, to carry out the flights of fancy of officials obsessed with social engineering of people halfway across the world, while our own nation hemorrhages and collapses and all the money being sucked out of it. Or also we just send our young men to die to make certain people rich in DC. I mean, honestly, that's really all we have here. It's either or. And also, have you seen pictures of how high-tech and clean the streets of Dubai or Singapore or Shanghai are? Even if a lot of that is a facade from those governments to present a happy image to the West, like a Potemkin village, what those images still show is that America, with all of our innovation and all of our wealth, well, we could be living far, far in the future too. But instead, our infrastructure is collapsing and we're getting poorer because we're the only country in the world that isn't allowed to reinvest into ourselves and to our people. We're told we have to spend that dollar all over the world on projects that only make a select few in this country very wealthy. And it doesn't leave these nations as docile client states giving back to us, but far from it.